are not me. Dainty Beavervelt ran up from behind the tent out of breath and sweaty. On seeing Chapelle, he stopped, began to whistle, held his hands behind his back, and pretended to be admiring the roof of the granary. Chapelle went over and stood by Geralt, very close. The Witcher did not move, but only narrowed his eyes. For a moment they looked at each other, and then Chapelle leaned over the bundle. "Doo-doo," he said to Dandelion's strangely deformed cordovan boots sticking out of the rolled-up kilim. "Copy Beavervelt, and quickly." "What?" Dainty yelled, stopping staring at the granary. "What's that?" "Be quiet," Chapelle said. "Well, Doo-doo, are things coming along?"
"I'm just—"
A muffled grunting issued from the kilim.
"I'm just a moment."
The cordovan boots sticking out of the kilim stretched, became blurred, and changed into the halfling's bare, hairy feet. "Get out, Doo-doo," Chapelle said. "And you, Dainty, be quiet. All halflings look the same, don't they?" Dainty mumbled something indistinctly. Geralt, eyes still narrowed, looked at Chapelle suspiciously. The minister, however, straightened up and looked all around, and all that remained of any gawkers who were still in the vicinity was the clacking of wooden clogs dying away in the distance. The second Dainty Beavervelt scrambled and rolled out of the bundle, sneezed, sat up and rubbed his eyes and nose. Dandelion perched himself on a trunk lying alongside and strummed away on his lute with an expression of moderate interest on his face. "Who do you think that is, Dainty?" Chapelle asked mildly. "Very similar to you, don't you think?"
"He's my cousin," the halfling shot back and grinned. "A close relative. Doo-doo Beavervelt of Knockgrass Meadow, an astute businessman. I've actually just decided—"
"Yes, Dainty?"
"I've decided to appoint him my factor in Novigrad. What do you say to that, cousin?" "Oh, thank you, cousin."
His close relative, the pride of the Beavervelt clan and an astute businessman, smiled broadly. Chapelle also smiled. "Has your dream about life in the city come true?" Geralt muttered. "What do you see in this city, Doo-doo? And you, Chapelle?"
"Had you lived on the moors," Chapelle muttered back, "and eaten roots, got soaked and frozen, you'd know. We also deserve something from life, Geralt. We aren't inferior to you."
"Very true," Geralt nodded. "You aren't. Perhaps it even happens that you're better. What happened to the real Chapelle?"
"Popped his clogs," the second Chapelle whispered. 2 months ago now. Apoplexy. May the earth lie lightly on him, and may the eternal fire light his way. I happened to be in the vicinity. No one noticed." "Geralt, you aren't going to—"
"What didn't anyone notice?" the Witcher asked, with an inscrutable expression.
"Thank you," Chapelle muttered.
"Are there more of you?"
"Is it important?"
"No," agreed the Witcher. "It isn't." A 2-cubit-tall figure in a green cap and spotted coney fur coat dashed out from behind the wagons and stalls and trotted over.
"Mr. Beavervelt,"
the gnome panted and stammered, looking around and sweeping his eyes from one halfling to the other.
"I presume, Shorty," Dainty said, "that you have a matter for my cousin Doo-doo Beavervelt to deal with? Speak. Speak. That is him." "Sorrel reports that everything has gone," the gnome said, and smiled broadly, showing small pointed teeth. "For 4 crowns apiece." "I think I know what it's about," Dainty said. "Pity Vivaldi's not here. He would have calculated the profit in no time." "If I may, cousin,"
Tellico, Longravinkler taught, Penstock for short, Doo-doo to his close friends and for the whole of Novigrad, a member of the large Beavervelt family, spoke up.
"If I may, I'll calculate it. I have an infallible memory for figures, as well as for other things." "By all means." Dainty gave a bow. "By all means, cousin." "The costs," the Doppler frowned, "were low. 18 for the oil, 8.50 for the cod liver oil. Altogether, including the string, 45 crowns. Takings, 600 at 4 crowns makes 2,400. No commission, because there weren't any middlemen."
Please, do not forget about the tax, the second Chapelle reminded him. Please do not forget that standing before you is a representative of the city authorities and the temple who treats his duties gravely and conscientiously.
It's exempt from tax, Dudu Beavervelt declared, because it was sold in a sacred cause.
Hey?
The cod liver oil, wax, and oil dyed with a little cochineal, the Doppler explained. Need only be poured into earthenware bowls with a piece of string dipped into it. The string, when lit, gives a beautiful red flame, which burns for a long time and doesn't smell. The eternal fire. The priests needed vigil lights for the altars of the eternal fire. Now they don't need them.
Bloody hell, Chapelle muttered. You're right. They needed vigil lights. Dudu, you're brilliant.
I take after my mother, Tellico said modestly.
Yes, indeed, the spitting image of his mother, Dainty agreed. Just look into those intelligent eyes. Begonia Beavervelt, my darling aunt, as I live and breathe.
Geralt, Dandelion groaned. He's earned more in 3 days than I've earned in my whole life by singing. In your place, the Witcher said gravely, I'd quit singing and take up commerce. Ask him, he may take you on as an apprentice.
Witcher,
Tellico said, tugging him by the sleeve.
Tell me how I could repay you.
22 crowns.
What?
For a new jacket. Look what's left of mine. Do you know what? Dandelion suddenly yelled. Let's all go to the House of Ill Repute, to Passiflora. The Beavervelts are paying.
Do they admit halflings?
Dainty asked with concern.
Just let them try not to.
Chapelle put on a menacing expression.
Just let them try, and I'll accuse their entire bordello of heresy.
Right, Dandelion called. Very satisfactory. Geralt, are you coming? The Witcher laughed softly. Do you know what, Dandelion? He said. I'll come with pleasure. A Little Sacrifice. Chapter 1. The mermaid emerged to waist height from the water and splashed her hands violently and hard against the surface. Geralt saw that she had gorgeous, utterly perfect breasts. Only the colour spoiled the effect. The nipples were dark green, and the areolae around them were only a little lighter. Nimbly aligning herself with an approaching wave, the mermaid arched gracefully, shook her wet willow-green hair, and sang melodiously. What? The Duke leaned over the side of the cog. What is she saying? She's declining, Geralt said. She says she doesn't want to. Have you explained that I love her? That I can't imagine life without her? That I want to wed her? Only her, no other. Yes, I have. And nothing. Say it again. The Witcher touched his lips and produced a quavering warble. Struggling to find the words and the intonation, he began to translate the Duke's avowal. The mermaid, lying back on the water, interrupted. Don't translate. Don't tire yourself, she sang. I understand. When he says he loves me, he always puts on such a foolish expression. Did he say anything definite? Not really. Pity, the mermaid said, before she flapped in the water and dived under, flexing her tail powerfully and making the sea foam with her notched flukes, which resembled the tail of a mullet. What? What did she say? The Duke asked. That it's a shame. What's a shame? What does she mean, shame? I'd say she turned you down. Nobody refuses me, the Duke roared, denying the obvious facts. My lord, the skipper of the cog muttered, walking over to them. The nets are ready. All we need do is cast them and she will be yours. I wouldn't advise it, Geralt said softly. She's not alone. There are more of them beneath the waves, and there may be a kraken deeper down there. The skipper quaked, blanched, and seized his backside with both hands in a nonsensical gesture. A kraken? Yes, a kraken, the Witcher repeated. I don't advise fooling around with nets. All she need do is scream, and all that'll be left of this tub will be a few floating planks. They'll drown us like kittens. Besides, Aglaval, you should decide whether you want to wed her or catch her in a net and keep her in a barrel. I love her, Aglaval said firmly. I want her for my wife. But for that, she must have legs and not a scaly tail. And it's feasible, since I bought a magical elixir with a full guarantee for 2 pounds of exquisite pearls. After drinking it, she'll grow legs. She'll just suffer a little, for 3 days, no more. Call her, Witcher. Tell her again. I've already told her twice. She said absolutely no. She doesn't consent. But she added that she knows a sea witch, who is prepared to cast a spell to turn your legs into a handsome tail, painlessly. She must be insane. She thinks I would have a fishy tail? Not a chance. Call her, get out. The Witcher leaned far out over the side. The water in the boat's shadow was green and seemed as thick as jelly. He did not have to call. The mermaid suddenly shot out above the surface in a fountain of water. For a moment, she literally stood on her tail, then dived down into the waves and turned on her back, revealing her attributes in all their glory. Geralt swallowed.
Hey, she sang. Will this take much longer? My skin's getting chapped from the sun. White hair, ask him if he consents.
He does not, the Witcher sang back. She nuts, understand, he cannot have a tail, cannot live beneath the water. You can breathe air, but he cannot breathe underwater.
I knew it, the mermaid screamed shrilly. I knew it. Excuses, foolish, naive excuses, not a bit of sacrifice. Whoever loves makes sacrifices. I made sacrifices for him every day. I hauled myself out onto the rocks for him. I wore out the scales on my bottom, frayed my fins. I cut coals for him, and he will not sacrifice those 2 hideous pegs for me. Love doesn't just mean taking. One also has to be able to give up things to make sacrifices. Tell him that.
She and that, Geralt called. Don't you understand? He cannot survive in the water.
I don't accept stupid excuses. I like him too, and want to have his fry. But how can I, if he doesn't want to be a spawner? Where should I deposit my eggs, huh? In his cap?
What is she saying? The Duke yelled. Geralt, I didn't bring you here to chat with her. She's digging her heels in. She's angry. Cast those nets, Aglaval roared. I'll keep her in a pool for a month, and then she'll... Shove it, the skipper yelled back, demonstrating what he was to shove with his middle finger. There might be a kraken beneath us. Ever seen a kraken, my lord? Hop into the water, if that is your will, and catch her with your hands. I'm not getting involved. I make my living by fishing from this cog. You make your living by my good will, you scoundrel. Cast your net, or I'll order you strung up. Kiss a dog's arse. I'm in charge on this cog. Be quiet, both of you, Geralt shouted irately. She's saying something. It's a difficult dialect. I need to concentrate.
I've had enough, Sheanats yelled melodiously. I'm hungry. Well, Whitehair, he must decide at once. Tell him just one thing. I will not be made a laughingstock of any longer, or associate with him if he is going to look like a 4-armed starfish. Tell him I have girlfriends who are much better at those frolics he was suggesting on the rocks, but I consider them immature games fit for children before they shed their scales. I'm a normal, healthy mermaid.
Sheanats,
don't interrupt. I haven't finished yet. I'm healthy, normal, and ripe for spawning, and if he really desires me, he must have a tail, fins, and everything a normal merman has. Otherwise, I don't want to know him.
Geralt translated quickly, trying not to be vulgar. He was not very successful. The Duke flushed and swore foully. The brazen hussy, he yelled. The frigid mackerel. Let her find herself a cod.
What did he say? Sheanats asked curiously, swimming over.
That he doesn't want a tail.
Then tell him to dry up.
What did she say? She told you, the Witcher translated, to go drown yourself. Chapter 2.
"Ah, well," Dandelion said. "Pity I couldn't sail with you, but what can I do? Sailing makes me puke like nobody's business. But you know what? I've never spoken to a mermaid. It's a shame, damn it."
"I know you," Geralt said, fastening his saddlebags. "You'll write a ballad anyway."
"Never fear. I already have the first stanzas. In my ballad, the mermaid will sacrifice herself for the Duke. She'll exchange her fishtail for slender legs, but will pay for it by losing her voice. The Duke will betray her, abandon her, and then she'll perish from grief and turn into foam when the first rays of sunshine—"
"Who'd believe such rot?"
"It doesn't matter," Dandelion snorted. "Ballads aren't written to be believed. They're written to move their audience. But why am I talking to you about this when you know bugger all about it? You'd better tell me how much Aglaval paid you."
"He didn't pay me anything. He claimed I'd failed to carry out the task, that he'd expected something else, and he pays for results, not good intentions."
Dandelion shook his head, took off his bonnet, and looked at the Witcher with a forlorn grimace on his mouth. "You mean we still don't have any money?"
"So it would seem."
Dandelion made an even more forlorn face. "It's all my fault," he moaned. "I'm to blame for it all, Geralt. Are you angry at me?" No, the Witcher wasn't angry at Dandelion. Not at all. There was no doubt Dandelion was to blame for what had befallen them. He had insisted they went to the fair at Four Maples. Organising festivities, the poet argued, satisfied people's profound and natural needs. From time to time, the bard maintained, a chap has to meet other people in a place where he can have a laugh and a sing-song, gorge himself on kebabs and pierogies, drink beer, listen to music, and squeeze a girl as he swung her around in the dance. If every chap wanted to satisfy those needs, Dandelion argued, individually, periodically, and randomly, an indescribable mess would arise. For that reason, holidays and festivities were invented, and since holidays and festivities exist, a chap ought to frequent them. Geralt did not challenge this, although taking part in festivities occupied a very low position on the list of his own profound and natural needs. Nonetheless, he agreed to accompany Dandelion, for he was counting on obtaining information from the gathered concentration of people about a possible mission or job. He'd had no work for a long time, and his cash reserves had shrunk alarmingly. The Witcher did not bear Dandelion a grudge for provoking the rangers of the forest. He was not innocent either, for he could have intervened and held the bard back. He did not, however, for he could not stand the infamous guardians of the forest, known as the Rangers, a volunteer force whose mission was to eradicate non-humans. It had annoyed him to hear their boasts about elves, spriggans, and eerie wives bristling with arrows, butchered or hanged. Dandelion, though, who after travelling for some time with the Witcher had become convinced of his impunity from retaliation, had surpassed himself. Initially, the Rangers had not reacted to his mockery, taunts, or filthy suggestions, which aroused the thunderous laughter of the watching villagers. When, however, Dandelion sang a hastily composed obscene and abusive couplet, ending with the words, "If you want to be a nothing, be a ranger," an argument and then a fierce mass punch-up broke out. The shed, serving as the dance hall, went up in smoke. Intervention came in the form of a squad of men belonging to Castellan Budibog, also known as the Empty-Headed, on whose estates lay Four Maples. The Rangers, Dandelion and Geralt, were found jointly guilty of all the damage and offences, which included the seduction of a red-headed and mute girl, who was found in the bushes behind the barn following the incident, blushing and grinning foolishly, with her shift torn up to her armpits. Fortunately, Castellan Budibog knew Dandelion, so it ended with a fine being paid, which nonetheless ate up all the money they had. They also had to flee from Four Maples as fast as they could ride, because the Rangers, who had been chased out of the village, were threatening revenge, and an entire squad of them, numbering over 40 men, was hunting Rosalkas in the neighbouring forests. Geralt did not have the slightest desire to be hit by one of the Rangers' arrows, whose heads were barbed like harpoons and inflicted dreadful injuries. So they had to abandon their original plan, which had involved doing the rounds of the villages on the edge of the forest, where the Witcher had reasonable prospects of work. Instead, they rode to Bremervoord on the coast. Unfortunately, apart from the love affair between Duke Aglaval and the mermaid Sheernats, which offered small chances of success, The Witcher had failed to find a job. They had already sold Geralt's gold signet for food, and an Alexandrite brooch the troubadour had once been given as a souvenir by one of his numerous paramours. Things were tight. But no, the Witcher was not angry with Dandelion. "No, Dandelion," he said, "I'm not angry with you." Dandelion did not believe him, which was quite apparent by the fact that he kept quiet. Dandelion was seldom quiet. He patted his horse's neck and fished around in his saddlebags for the umpteenth time. Geralt knew he would not find anything there they could sell. The smell of food, borne on a breeze from a nearby tavern, was becoming unbearable. "Master!" somebody shouted. "Hey, master!" "Yes," Geralt said, turning around. A big-bellied, well-built man in felt boots and a heavy fur-lined wolfskin coat clambered out of a cart pulled by a pair of onagers, which had just stopped alongside. That is," the paunchy man said, embarrassed, walking over. "I didn't mean you, sir. I meant Master Dandelion. It is I." The poet proudly sat up straight, adjusting his bonnet, bearing an egret feather. "What is your need, my good man?" "Begging your pardon," the paunchy man said, "I am Teleri Drowhard, spice merchant and dean of our local guild. My son, Gaspar, has just plighted his troth to Dahlia, the daughter of Mestfin, the cog skipper." "Ha!" Dandelion said, maintaining a haughty air. "I offer my congratulations and extend my wishes of happiness to the betrothed couple. How may I be of help? Does it concern jus prime noctis? I never decline that." No. That is, you see, the betrothal banquet and ball are this evening. Since it got out that you, master, have come to Bramavord, my wife won't let up, just like a woman. "Listen," she says, "Teleri, we'll show everybody we aren't churls like them, that we stand for culture and art, that when we have a feast it's refined and not an excuse to get pissed and throw up." I says to her, "Silly moo, but we've already hired one bard, won't that suffice?" And she says one is too few. Ho, ho, Master Dandelion. Well, I never. Such a celebrity. That'll be one in the eye for our neighbours. "Master, do us the honour. I'm prepared to give 25 talars as a gesture, naturally, to show my support for the arts." "Do my ears deceive me?" Dandelion drawled. I am to be the second bard? An appendix to some other musician? I have not sunk so low, my dear sir, as to accompany somebody." Drowhard blushed. "Forgive me, master," he gibbered. "That isn't what I meant. It was my wife. Forgive me. Do us the honour." "Dandelion," Geralt hissed softly, "don't put on airs. We need those few pennies." "Don't try to teach me," the poet yelled. "Me putting on airs? Me? Look at him. What should I say about you, who rejects a lucrative proposition every other day? You won't kill hirkas because they're an endangered species, or mecopterans because they're harmless, or night spirits because they're sweet, or dragons because your code forbids it. I, just imagine it, also have my self-respect. I also have a code." "Dandelion, please, do it for me. A little sacrifice, friend, nothing more. I swear I won't turn my nose up at the next job that comes along. Come on, Dandelion." The troubadour looked down at the ground and scratched his chin, which was covered in soft, fair bristles. Drowhard, mouth gaping, moved closer. "Master, do us this honour. My wife won't forgive me if I don't invite you. Now then, I'll make it 30. 35, Dandelion said firmly. Geralt smiled and hopefully breathed in the scent of food wafting from the tavern. "Agreed, master, agreed," Teleri Drowhard said quickly. So quickly, it was evident he would have given 40 had the need arisen. "And now, my home, if you desire to groom yourself and rest, is your home. And you, sir, what do they call you?" "Geralt of Rivia." "And I invite you too, sir, of course, for a bite to eat and something to drink." "Certainly, with pleasure," Dandelion said. "Show us the way, my dear sir. And, just between us, who is the other bard?" The Honourable Miss Essie Davin. Chapter 3. Geralt rubbed a sleeve over the silver studs of his jacket and his belt buckle one more time, smoothed down his hair, which was held down with a clean headband, and polished his boots by rubbing one leg against the other. Dandelion? The bard smoothed the egret feather pinned to his bonnet and straightened and pulled down his jerkin. The two of them had spent half the day cleaning their garments and tidying them up. What, Geralt? Behave in such a way as they throw us out after supper and not before. You must be joking, the poet said indignantly. What's your manners yourself? Shall we go in? We shall. Do you hear? Somebody's singing. A woman. Have you only just noticed? That's Essie Davin, known as Little Eye. What? Have you never met a female troubadour? True, I forgot you steer clear of places where art flourishes. Little Eye is a gifted poet and singer, though not without her flaws, among which impertinence, so I hear, is not the least. What she is singing now happens to be one of my ballads. She will soon hear a piece of my mind which will make that little eye of hers water. Dandelion, have mercy. They'll throw us out. Don't interfere. These are professional issues. Let's go in. Dandelion? Huh? Why Little Eye? You'll see. The banquet was being held in a huge storeroom, emptied of barrels of herrings and cod liver oil. The smell had been killed, though not entirely, by hanging up bunches of mistletoe and heather decorated with coloured ribbons wherever possible. Here and there, as is customary, were also hung plats of garlic meant to frighten off vampires. The tables and benches, which had been pushed towards the walls, had been covered with white linen, and in a corner there was a large makeshift hearth and spit. It was crowded, but not noisy. More than 4 dozen people of various estates and professions, not to mention the pimply youth and his snub-nosed fiancée, with her eyes fixed on her husband-to-be, were listening reverentially to a sonorous and melodious ballad, sung by a young woman in a demure blue frock, sitting on a platform with a lute resting on her knee. The woman could not have been older than 18 and was very slim. Her long, luxuriant hair was the colour of dark gold. They entered as the girl finished the song and thanked the audience for the thunderous applause with a nod of her head, which shook her hair gently. Greetings, master, greetings. Drowhard, dressed in his best clothes, leapt briskly over to them and pulled them towards the centre of the storeroom. Greetings to you, Gerard, sir. I am honoured. Yes. Come here. Noble ladies, noble gentlemen, here is our honoured guest, who gave us this honour and honoured us. Master Dandelion, the celebrated singer and poet, has honoured us with his great honour. Thus honoured, we... Cheers and applause resounded, and just in time, for it was looking as though Drowhard would honour and stammer himself to death. Dandelion, blushing with pride, assumed a superior air and bowed carelessly, then waved a hand at a row of girls sitting on a long bench like hens on a roost, being chaperoned by older matrons. The girls were sitting stiffly, giving the impression they had been stuck to the bench with carpenter's glue or some other powerful adhesive. Without exception, they were holding their hands on tightly clenched knees, and their mouths were half open. And presently, Drowhard called, come forth, help yourself to beer, fellows, and to the victuals. Prithee, avail yourselves. The girl in the blue dress forced her way through the crowd, which had crashed onto the food-laden tables like a sea wave. Greetings, Dandelion, she said. Geralt considered the expression eyes like stars banal and hackneyed, particularly since he had begun travelling with Dandelion, as the troubadour was inclined to throw that compliment about freely, usually, indeed, undeservedly. However, with regard to Essie Davin, even somebody as little susceptible to poetry as the Witcher had to concede the aptness of her nickname, for in her agreeable and pretty, but otherwise unremarkable little face shone a huge, beautiful, shining dark blue eye, which riveted the gaze. Essie Davin's other eye was largely covered and obscured by a golden curl, which fell onto her cheek. From time to time, Essie flung the curl away with a toss of her head or a puff, at which point it turned out that Little Eye's other little eye was in every way the equal of the first. Greetings, Little Eye, Dandelion said, grimacing. "That was a pretty ballad you just sang. You've improved your repertoire considerably. I've always maintained that if one is incapable of writing poetry oneself, one should borrow other people's. Have you borrowed many of them?"
"A few," Essie Doven retorted at once and smiled, revealing little white teeth. "2 or 3. I wanted to use more, but it wasn't possible. Dreadful gibberish, and the tunes, though pleasant and unpretentious in their simplicity, not to say primitivism, are not what my audiences expect. Have you written anything new, Dandelion? I don't seem to be aware of it."
"Small wonder," the bard sighed. "I sing my ballads in places to which only the gifted and renowned are invited, and you don't frequent such locations after all." Essie blushed slightly and blew the lock of hair aside.
"Very true," she said. "I don't frequent bordellos, as the atmosphere depresses me. I sympathise with you that you have to sing in places like that, but, well, that's the way it is. If one has no talent, one can't choose one's audiences."
Now Dandelion visibly blushed. Little Eye, however, laughed joyously, flung an arm around his neck all of a sudden, and kissed him on the cheek. The Witcher was taken aback, but not too greatly. A professional colleague of Dandelion's could not, indeed, differ much from him in terms of predictability.
"Dandelion, you old bugger," Essie said, still hugging the bard's neck. "I'm glad to see you again, in good health and in full possession of your mental faculties."
"Pshaw, Poppet." Dandelion seized the girl around the waist, picked her up, and spun her around so that her dress billowed around her. "You were magnificent, by the gods! I haven't heard such marvellous spitefulness for ages. You bicker even more captivatingly than you sing, and you look simply stunning."
"I've asked you so many times," Essie said, blowing her lock of hair away and glancing at Geralt, "not to call me Poppet, Dandelion. Besides, I think it's high time you introduced me to your companion. I see he doesn't belong to our guild."
"Save us, O gods!" the troubadour laughed. "He, Poppet, has no voice or ear, and can only rhyme rear with beer. This is Geralt of Rivia, a member of the Guild of Witchers. Come closer, Geralt, and kiss Little Eye's hand." The Witcher approached, not really knowing what to do. One usually only kissed ladies of the rank of Duchess and higher on the hand, or the ring, and one was supposed to kneel. Regarding women of lower standing, that gesture, here in the South, was considered erotically unambiguous, and as such tended to be reserved only for close couples. Little Eye dispelled his doubts, however, by willingly holding her hand out, high with the fingers facing downwards. He grasped it clumsily and feigned a kiss. Essie, her beautiful eye still popping out of her head, blushed.
"Geralt of Rivia," she said. "What company you keep, Dandelion?"
"It is an honour for me," the Witcher muttered, aware he was rivaling Drowhard in eloquence. "Madam—"
"Damn it!"
Dandelion snorted. "Don't abash Little Eye with all that stammering and titling. She's Essie, he's Geralt. End of introductions. Let's get to the point, Poppet."
"If you call me Poppet once more, you'll get a slap."
"What point do we have to get to?" "We have to agree on how we're going to sing. I suggest one after the other, a few ballads each, for the effect. Of course, singing our own ballads."
"Suits me."
"How much is Drowhard paying you?"
"None of your business. Who goes first?"
"You."
"Agreed. Hey, look who's joined us. The most noble Duke of Aglaval. He's just coming in, look."
"Well, well," Dandelion said gleefully. "The audience is going up market. Although, on the other hand, we oughtn't to count on him. He's a skinflint. Geralt can confirm it. The local duke bloody hates paying. He hires, admittedly, but he's not so good at paying."
"I've heard a few things about him."
Essie, looking at Geralt, tossed the lock of hair back from her cheek.
"They were talking about it in the harbour and by the jetty. The famous Sheernats, right?"
Aglaval responded to the deep bows of the 2 rows by the door with a brief nod, and then almost immediately went over to Drowhard and drew him away into a corner, giving a sign that he was not expecting deference or ceremony in the centre of the storehouse. Geralt watched them out of the corner of his eye. They spoke softly, but it was apparent that they were both agitated. Drowhard kept wiping his forehead with a sleeve, shaking his head and scratching his neck. He was asking questions which the Duke, surly and dour, was responding to by shrugging.
"His Grace,"
Essie said quietly, moving closer to Geralt. Looks preoccupied. Affairs of the heart again? The misunderstanding from earlier today with his famous mermaid? Hey, Witcher?
Perhaps, Geralt answered, looking askance at the poet, astonished and strangely annoyed by her question. Well, everybody has some personal problems. However, not everybody likes them to be sung about from the rooftops. Little Eye blanched slightly, blew away her lock of hair, and looked at him defiantly.
By saying that, did you mean to offend or only tease me?
Neither one nor the other. I merely wanted to forestall further questions about the problems between Aglaval and the mermaid, questions I do not feel entitled to answer.
I understand.
Essie Darvin's gorgeous eye narrowed slightly.
I won't burden you with a similar dilemma. I shall not ask you any of the questions I meant to ask, and which, if I'm to be frank, I treated only as a prelude and invitation to a pleasant conversation. Very well. That conversation will not come to pass, then, and you need fear not that the content will be sung from some rooftop. It has been my pleasure.
She turned on her heel and walked off towards the tables, where she was immediately greeted with respect. Dandelion shifted his weight from foot to foot and coughed tellingly. I wouldn't say that was exquisitely courteous of you, Geralt. It came out wrongly, the Witcher agreed. I hurt her, quite unintentionally. Perhaps I should follow her and apologise. Drop it, the bard said, and added aphoristically, There is never a second opportunity to make a first impression. Come on, let's have a beer instead. They did not make it to the beer. Drauhard pushed his way through a garrulous group of merchants. Gerard, sir, he said, please step this way. His Grace would like to talk to you. Very well. Geralt, Dandelion seized him by the sleeve. Don't forget. Forget what? You promised to agree to any task without complaint. I shall hold you to it. What was it you said? A little sacrifice? Very well, Dandelion. He went off with Drauhard into the corner of the storeroom, away from the guests. Aglaval was sitting at a low table. He was accompanied by a colourfully dressed, weather-beaten man with a short, black beard, whom Geralt had not noticed earlier. We meet again, Witcher, the Duke said, although this morning I swore I didn't want to see you again. But I do not have another Witcher to hand, so you will have to do. Meet Zelest, my bailiff and pearl-diving steward. Speak, Zelest. This morning, said the weather-beaten individual in a low voice, we planned to go diving outside the usual grounds. One boat went further westwards beyond the headland, towards the Dragon's Fangs. The Dragon's Fangs, Aglaval cut in, are two volcanic reefs at the end of the headland. They can be seen from our coast. Aye, Zelest confirmed. People don't usually sail there, for there are whirlpools and rocks. It's dangerous to dive there. But there's fewer and fewer pearls by the coast. Aye, one boat went there. A crew of 7 souls, 2 sailors and 5 divers, including one woman. When they hadn't returned by the eventide, we began to fret, although the sea was calm, as if oil had been poured on it. I sent a few swift skiffs there, and we soon found the boat drifting on the sea. There was no one in it, not a living soul, vanished into thin air. We know not what happened, but there must have been fighting there, a veritable massacre. There were signs. What signs? The Witcher squinted. Well, the whole deck was spattered in blood. Drauhard hissed and looked around anxiously. Zelest lowered his voice. It was as I said, he repeated, clenching his jaw. The boat was spattered in gore, length and breadth. No question but a veritable massacre took place on board. Something killed those people. They say it was a sea monster. No doubt a sea monster. Not pirates? Asked Geralt softly. Or pearl diving competition? Do you rule out a normal knife fight? We do, said the Duke. There are no pirates here, no competition, and knife fights don't result in everybody, to the last man, disappearing. No, Geralt. Zelest is right. It was a sea monster and nothing else. Listen, now no one dares to go to sea, not even to the nearby and familiar fishing grounds. The people are scared stiff and the harbour is paralysed. Even the cogs and galleys aren't setting out. Do you see, Witcher? I see, Geralt nodded. Who will show me this place? Ha! Aglaval
placed a hand on the table and drummed his fingers. "I like that. That's Witcher talk, getting to the point at once, without unnecessary chatter. Yes, I like that. Do you see, Drowhard? I told you, a hungry Witcher is a good Witcher. Well, Geralt, after all, were it not for your musical companion, you would have gone to bed without your supper again. My information is correct, is it not?" Drowhard lowered his head. Celeste stared vacantly ahead. "Who'll show me the place?" Geralt repeated, looking coldly at Aglaval. "Celeste," said the Duke, his smile fading. "Celeste will show you the dragon's fangs and the route to them. When will you start work?" "First thing tomorrow morning. Be at the harbour, Mr. Celeste." "Very well, Master Witcher." "Excellent." The Duke rubbed his hands and smiled mockingly again. "Geralt, I'm relying on you to do better with this monster than you did with the Sheernat situation. I really am. Aha, one more thing. I forbid any gossiping about this incident. I don't want any more panic than we already have on our hands. Do you understand, Drowhard? I'll order your tongue torn out if you breathe a word." "I understand, Your Grace." "Good," Aglaval said, getting up. "Then I shall go. I shall not interfere with the ball, nor provoke any rumours. Farewell, Drowhard. Wish the betrothed couple happiness on my behalf." "My thanks, Duke." Essie Davin, who was sitting on a low stool surrounded by a dense crowd of listeners, was singing a melodious and wistful ballad about the woeful fate of a betrayed lover. Dandelion, leaning against a post, was muttering something under his breath and counting bars and syllables on his fingers. "Well?" he asked. "Do you have a job, Geralt?" "Yes," the Witcher answered, not going into details, which in any case did not concern the bard. "I told you I smelt a rat. And money. Good. Very good. I'll make some money. You will too. We'll be able to afford to revel. We'll go to Sidaris in time for the Grape Harvest Festival. And now, if you'll excuse me, I've spotted something interesting on the bench over there." Geralt followed the poet's gaze, but aside from about a dozen girls with half-open mouths, he saw nothing interesting. Dandelion pulled down his jerkin, set his bonnet over his right ear, and approached the bench in long, swinging strides. Having passed the matrons guarding the maidens with a deft flanking manoeuvre, he began his customary ritual of flashing a broad smile. Essie Davin finished her ballad and was rewarded with applause, a small purse, and a large bouquet of pretty, though somewhat withered, chrysanthemums. The Witcher circulated among the guests, looking for an opportunity to finally occupy a seat at the table, which was laden with victuals. He gazed longingly at the rapidly vanishing pickled herrings, stuffed cabbage leaves, boiled cod heads and mutton chops, at the rings of sausage and capons being torn into pieces, and the smoked salmon and hams being chopped up with knives. The problem was that there were no vacant seats at the table. The maidens and matrons, somewhat livened up, surrounded Dandelion, calling squeakily for a performance. Dandelion smiled falsely and made excuses, ineffectually feigning modesty. Geralt, overcoming his embarrassment, virtually forced his way to the table. An elderly gentleman, smelling strongly of vinegar, moved aside, surprisingly courteously and willingly, almost knocking off several guests sitting alongside him. Geralt got down to eating without delay and, in a flash, had cleared the only dish he could reach. The gentleman, smelling of vinegar, passed him another. In gratitude, the Witcher listened attentively to the elderly gentleman's long tirade concerning the present times and the youth of today. The elderly gentleman stubbornly described sexual freedom as laxity, so Geralt had some difficulty keeping a straight face. Essie stood by the wall beneath bunches of mistletoe, alone, tuning her lute. The Witcher saw a young man in a brocaded waisted caftan approaching and saying something to the poet, smiling wanly the while. Essie looked at the young man, her pretty mouth sneering slightly, and said several quick words. The young man cowered and walked hurriedly away, and his ears, as red as beetroots, glowed in the semi-darkness for a long time afterwards. "Abomination, shame, and disgrace," the elderly gentleman, smelling of vinegar, continued. "One enormous laxity, sir." "Indeed." Geralt nodded tentatively, wiping his plate with a hunk of bread. "May I request silence, noble ladies, noble lords," Drowhard called, walking into the middle of the room.
The celebrated Master Dandelion, in spite of being a little bodily indisposed and weary, shall now sing for us his celebrated ballad about Queen Marianne and the Black Raven. He shall do it at the urgent plea of Miss Veverka, the miller's daughter, whom, he said, he may not refuse. Miss Veverka, one of the less comely girls on the bench, became beautified in the blink of an eye. Uproar and applause erupted, drowning out further laxity from the elderly gentleman smelling of vinegar. Dandelion waited for total silence, played a striking prelude on his lute, after which he began to sing without taking his eyes off Miss Veverka, who was growing more beautiful with each verse. Indeed, Geralt thought, that whoreson is more effective than all the magical oils and creams Yennefer sells in her little shop in Vengerberg. He saw Essie steal behind the crowded semicircle of Dandelion's audience and cautiously vanish through the door to the terrace. Driven by a strange impulse, he slipped nimbly out from behind the table and followed her. She stood, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the railing of the jetty, head drawn into her delicate, upraised shoulders. She was gazing at the rippling sea, glistening from the light of the moon and the fires burning in the harbour. A board creaked beneath Geralt's foot. Essie straightened up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you," he said stiffly, searching for that sudden grimace on her lips to which she had treated the young man in brocade a moment earlier. "You aren't disturbing me," she replied, smiling and tossing back her lock of hair. "I'm not seeking solitude here, but fresh air. Was all that smoke and airlessness bothering you too?" "A little. But I'm more bothered by knowing that I offended you. I came here to apologise, Essie, to try to regain the chance of a pleasant conversation." "You deserve my apology," she said, pressing her hands down on the railing. "I reacted too impetuously. I always react too impetuously. I don't know how to control myself. Excuse me and give me another chance, for a conversation." He approached and leaned on the railing beside her. He felt the warmth emanating from her and the faint scent of verbena. He liked the scent of verbena, although the scent of verbena was not the scent of lilac and gooseberry. "What do you connect with the sea, Geralt?" she asked suddenly. "Unease," he answered, almost without thinking. "Interesting. And you seem so calm and composed." "I didn't say I feel unease. You asked for associations." "Associations are the image of the soul. I know what I'm talking about. I'm a poet." What do you associate with the sea, Essie?" he asked quickly, to put an end to discussion about the unease he was feeling. "With constant movement," she answered after a pause. "With change, and with riddles, with mystery, with something I cannot grasp, which I might be able to describe in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 poems, never actually reaching the core, the heart of the matter. Yes, that's it." "And so," he said, feeling the verbena affecting him more and more strongly, "what you feel is also unease, and you seem so calm and composed." She turned towards him, tossing back her golden curl and fixing her gorgeous eyes on him.
"I'm not calm or composed, Geralt."
It happened suddenly, utterly unexpectedly. The movement he made, which was supposed to have been just a touch, a gentle touch of her arms, turned into a powerful grasp of both hands around her very slender waist, into a rapid, though not rough, pulling of her closer, and into a sudden, passionate contact of their bodies. Essie stiffened suddenly, straightened, bent her torso powerfully backwards, pressed her hands down on his firmly, as though she wanted to pull away and push his hands from her waist. But instead of that, she seized them tightly, tipped her head forward, parted her lips, and hesitated.
"Why? Why this?"
she whispered. Her eye was wide open, her golden curl had fallen onto her cheek. Calmly and slowly, he tipped his head forward, brought his face closer, and suddenly and quickly pursed his lips into a kiss. Essie, however, even then, did not release his hands grasping her waist, and still powerfully arched her back, avoiding bodily contact. Remaining like that, they turned around slowly as though in a dance. She kissed him eagerly, expertly, for a long time. Then she nimbly and effortlessly freed herself from his embrace, turned away, once again leaned on the railing, and drew her head into her shoulders.
Geralt suddenly felt dreadfully, indescribably stupid. The feeling stopped him from approaching her, from putting an arm around her hunched back. "Why?" she asked coolly, without turning around. "Why did you do that?" She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, and the Witcher suddenly understood he had made a mistake. He suddenly knew that insincerity, lies, pretense and bravado would lead him straight into a swamp, where only a springy, matted layer of grass and moss, liable to yield, tear or break at any moment, separated him from the abyss below. "Why?" she repeated. He did not answer. "Are you looking for a woman for the night?" He did not reply. Essie turned slowly and touched his arm. "Let's go back in," she said easily. But he was not deceived by her manner, sensing how tense she was. "Don't make that face. It was nothing. And the fact that I'm not looking for a man for tonight isn't your fault, is it?" "Essie, let's go back, Geralt. Dandelion has played 3 encores. It's my turn. Come on. I'll sing." She glanced at him strangely and blew her lock of hair away from her eye. "I'll sing for you." Chapter 4.
"Oh-ho,"
the Witcher said, feigning surprise.
"So you're here. I thought you wouldn't be back tonight."
Dandelion locked the door with the hasp, hung up his lute and his bonnet with the egret's feather on a peg, took off his jerkin, brushed it down, and laid it on some sacks lying in the corner of the small room. Apart from the sacks, a wooden pail, and a huge palliasse stuffed with dried beanstalks, there was no furniture in the attic room. Even the candle stood on the floor in a hardened pool of wax. Drauhard admired Dandelion, but clearly not enough to give him the run of a chamber or even a box room. "And why," asked Dandelion, removing his boots, "did you think I wouldn't be back tonight?"
"I thought,"
The Witcher lifted himself up on an elbow, crunching bean straw,
"you'd go and sing serenades beneath the window of Miss Ververke, at whom your tongue has been hanging out the whole evening, like a pointer at the sight of a bitch."
"Ha, ha!" the bard laughed. "But you're so oafishly stupid. You didn't understand anything. Ververke? I don't care about Ververke. I simply wanted to stab Miss Acaretta with jealousy, as I shall make a pass at her tomorrow. Move over." Dandelion collapsed on the palliasse and pulled the blanket off Geralt. Geralt, feeling a strange anger, turned his head towards the tiny window, through which, had it not been for some industrious spiders, he would have seen the starry sky. "Why so huffy?" the poet asked. "Does it bother you that I make advances to girls? Since when? Perhaps you've become a druid and taken a vow of chastity. Or perhaps—"
"Don't go on. I'm tired. Have you not noticed that for the first time in 2 weeks we have a palliasse and a roof over our heads? Doesn't it gladden you that the rain won't be dripping on us in the wee small hours?"
"For me," Dandelion fantasized, "a palliasse without a girl isn't a palliasse. It's incomplete happiness. And what is incomplete happiness?" Geralt groaned softly, as usual when Dandelion was assailed by nocturnal talkativeness. "Incomplete happiness," the bard continued, engrossed in his own voice, "is like a kiss interrupted. Why are you grinding your teeth, if I may ask?"
"You're incredibly boring, Dandelion. Nothing but palliasses, girls, bums, tits, incomplete happiness, and kisses interrupted by dogs set on you by your lover's parents. Why, you clearly can't behave any differently. Clearly only easy lewdness, not to say uncritical promiscuity, allows you musicians to compose ballads, write poems, and sing. That is clearly, write it down, the dark side of your talent."
He had said too much and had not cooled his voice sufficiently, and Dandelion saw through him effortlessly and unerringly. "Aha," he said calmly. "Essie Darvin, also known as Little Eye. The alluring little eye of Little Eye fixed its gaze on the Witcher and caused confusion in the Witcher. The Witcher behaved like a little schoolboy before a queen, and rather than blame himself, he is blaming her and searching for her dark side."
"You're talking rubbish, Dandelion."
"No, my dear. Essie made an impression on you. You can't hide it. I don't see anything wrong with that, actually. But beware, and don't make a mistake. She is not what you think. If her talent has its dark sides, they certainly aren't what you imagine. I conjecture, said the Witcher, trying to control his voice, that you know her very well. Quite well, but not in the way you think. Not like that. Quite original for you, you'll admit. You're stupid, the bard said, stretching and placing both hands under his neck. I've known Poppet almost since she was a child. To me, she's like a younger sister. So I repeat, don't make any silly mistakes about her. You'd be harming her greatly, because you also made an impression on her. Admit it, you desire her. Even if I did, unlike you, I'm not accustomed to talking about it, Geralt said sharply, or writing songs about it. I thank you for your words about her, because perhaps you have indeed saved me from a stupid mistake. But let that be an end to it. I regard the subject as exhausted. Dandelion lay motionless for a moment, saying nothing. But Geralt knew him too well. I know, the poet said at last. Now I know everything. You know fuck all, Dandelion. Do you know what your problem is, Geralt? You think you're different. You flaunt your otherness, what you consider abnormal. You aggressively impose that abnormality on others, not understanding that for people who think clear-headedly, you're the most normal man under the sun, and they all wish that everybody was so normal. What of it that you have quicker reflexes than most, and vertical pupils in sunlight, that you can see in the dark like a cat, that you know a few spells? Big deal. I, my dear, once knew an innkeeper who could fart for 10 minutes without stopping, playing the tune to the psalm Greetus, Greetus, O Morning Star. Heedless of his, let's face it, unusual talent, that innkeeper was the most normal among the normal. He had a wife, children, and a grandmother, afflicted by palsy. What does that have to do with Essie Davon? Could you explain? Of course. You wrongfully thought, Geralt, that little I was interested in you out of morbid, downright perverted curiosity, that she looks at you as though you were a queer fish, a two-headed calf or a salamander in a menagerie. And you immediately became annoyed, gave her a rude, undeserved reprimand at the first opportunity, struck back at a blow she hadn't dealt. I witnessed it, after all. I didn't witness the further course of events, of course, but I noticed your flight from the room and saw her glowing cheeks when you returned. Yes, Geralt, I'm alerting you to a mistake, and you have already made it. You wanted to take revenge on her for, in your opinion, her morbid curiosity. You decided to exploit that curiosity. You're talking rubbish. You tried, the bard continued, unmoved, to learn if it was possible to bed her in the hay, if she was curious to find out what it's like to make love with a misfit, with a witcher. Fortunately, Essie turned out to be smarter than you, and generously took pity on your stupidity, having understood its cause. I conclude this from the fact you did not return from the jetty with a fat lip. Have you finished? Yes, I have. Good night, then. I know why you're furious and gnashing your teeth. No doubt. You know everything. I know who warped you like that, who left you unable to understand a normal woman. Oh, but that Yennefer of yours was a troublemaker. I'm damned if I know what you see in her. Drop it, Dandelion. Do you really not prefer normal girls like Essie? What do sorceresses have that Essie doesn't? Age, perhaps? Little I may not be the youngest, but she's as old as she looks. And do you know what Yennefer once confessed to me after a few stiff drinks? She told me that the first time she did it with a man, it was exactly a year after the invention of the two-furrow plough. You're lying. Yennefer loathes you like the plague and would never confide in you. All right, I was lying, I confess. You don't have to. I know you. You only think you know me. Don't forget, I'm complicated by nature. Dandelion. The Witcher sighed, now genuinely tired. You're a cynic, a lecher, a womanizer, and a liar. And there's nothing, believe me, nothing complicated about that. Good night. Good night, Geralt. Chapter 5 You rise early, Essie.
The poet smiled, holding down her hair, which was being blown around by the wind. She stepped gingerly onto the jetty, avoiding the holes and rotten planks. I couldn't miss the chance of watching the Witcher at work. Will you think me nosy again, Geralt? Why, I don't deny it. I really am nosy. How goes it?
How goes what?
Oh, Geralt, she said, you underestimate my curiosity and my talent for gathering and interpreting information. I know everything about the case of the Pearl Divers. I know the details of your agreement with Aglaval. I know you're looking for a sailor willing to sail there, towards the Dragon's Fangs. Did you find one? He looked at her searchingly for a moment, and then suddenly decided.
No, he replied. I didn't. Not one.
Are they afraid?
Yes, they are.
How, then, do you intend to carry out an exploration if you can't go to sea? How, without sailing, do you plan to get at the monster that killed the Pearl Divers? He took her by the hand and led her from the jetty. They walked slowly along the edge of the sea, across the pebbly beach, beside the launches pulled up on the shore, among the rows of nets hung up on stilts among the curtains of split, drying fish being blown by the wind. Geralt unexpectedly found that the poet's company did not bother him at all, that it was not wearisome or intrusive. Apart from that, he hoped that a calm and matter-of-fact conversation would erase the results of that stupid kiss on the terrace. The fact that Essie had come to the jetty filled him with the hope that she did not bear him a grudge. He was content.
Get at the monster, he muttered, repeating her words. If only I knew how. I know very little about sea monsters.
Interesting. From what I know, there are many more monsters in the sea than there are on land, both in terms of number and variety of species. It would seem, thus, that the sea ought to be a great opportunity for witches to show what they can do.
Well, it isn't.
Why?
The expansion of people onto the sea, he said, clearing his throat and turning his face away, hasn't lasted very long. Witches were needed long ago on the land during the first phase of colonization. We aren't cut out to fight sea-dwelling creatures, although you're right, the sea is full of all sorts of aggressive filth. But our witcher abilities are insufficient against sea monsters. Those creatures are either too big for us, or are too well armoured, or are too sure in their element, or all three.
And the monster that killed the Pearl Divers? You have no idea what it was?
A kraken, perhaps.
No. A kraken would have wrecked the boat, but it was intact, and, as they said, totally full of blood. Little Eye swallowed and visibly paled. Don't think I'm being a know-all. I grew up by the sea, and I've seen a few things.
In that case, what could it have been? A giant squid? It might have dragged those people from the deck.
There wouldn't have been any blood. It wasn't a squid, Geralt, or a killer whale, or a draco turtle, because whatever it was didn't destroy or capsize the boat. Whatever it was went on board and carried out the slaughter there. Perhaps you're making a mistake looking for it in the sea.
The Witcher pondered. I'm beginning to admire you, Essie, he said.
The poet blushed.
You're right. It may have attacked from the air. It may have been an ornithodragon, a griffin, a wyvern, a flying drake, or a forktail, possibly even a rock.
Excuse me, Essie said. Look who's coming. Aglaval was approaching along the shore alone, his clothes sopping wet. He was visibly angry and flushed with rage on seeing them. Essie curtsied slightly. Geralt bent his head, pressing his fist to his chest. Aglaval spat. I sat on the rocks for 3 hours almost from daybreak, he snarled. She didn't even make an appearance. 3 hours, like an ass on rocks swept by the waves.
Sorry, the Witcher muttered.
You're sorry, the Duke exploded. Sorry? It's your fault. You fouled everything up. You spoiled everything.
What did I spoil? I was only working as an interpreter.
To hell with work like that, Aglaval interrupted angrily, showing off his profile. His profile was indeed kingly, worthy of being struck on coinage. Verily, it would have been better not to hire you. It sounds paradoxical, but while we didn't have an interpreter, we understood each other better, Sheernats and I, if you know what I mean. But now, do you know what they're saying in town?
Rumours are spreading that the pearl divers perished because I enraged the mermaid, that it's her revenge. Nonsense, the Witcher commented coldly. How am I to know that it's nonsense? The Duke growled. How do I know you didn't tell her something? Do I really know what she's capable of? What monsters she chums around with down in the depths? By all means, prove to me that it's nonsense. Bring me the head of the beast that killed the pearl divers. Get to work instead of flirting on the beach. To work. Geralt reacted angrily. How? Am I to go out to sea, straddling a barrel? Your Zeleste threatened the sailors with torture and the noose, but in spite of that, no one wants to sail out with me. Zeleste himself isn't too keen either. So how? What? Does it bother me, how? Aglaval yelled, interrupting. That's your problem. What are witches for, if not so that decent folk don't have to rack their brains about how to rid themselves of monsters? I've hired you to do the job, and I demand you carry it out. If not, get out of here before I drive you to the borders of my realm with my whip. Calm down, Your Grace, Little Eye said softly, but her paleness and trembling hands betrayed her irritation. And please don't threaten, Geralt. It so happens that Dandelion and I have several friends. King Ithane of Sidaris, to mention but one, likes us and our ballads very much. King Ithane is an enlightened monarch and always says that our ballads aren't just lively music and rhymes, but a way of spreading news, that they are a chronicle of humankind. Do you wish, Your Grace, to be written into the chronicle of humankind? I can have it arranged. Aglaval looked at her for a while with a cold, contemptuous gaze. The pearl divers who died had wives and children, he finally said, much more quietly and calmly. When hunger afflicts the remaining ones, they will put to sea again. Pearl, sponge, and oyster divers, lobster fishers, fishermen, all of them. And now they are afraid, but hunger will overcome their fear. They will go to sea. But will they return? What do you say to that, Geralt, Miss Darvin? I'd be interested to hear the ballad which will sing of that. A ballad about a witcher standing idly on the shore looking at the blood-spattered decks of boats and weeping children. Essie blanched even more, but raised her head proudly, blew away the lock of hair, and was just preparing a riposte when Geralt seized her hand and squeezed it, stopping her words. That is enough, he said. In this entire flood of words, only one has true significance. You hired me, Aglaval. I accepted the task and shall accomplish it, if it is feasible. I am relying on it, the Duke said curtly. Then goodbye. My respects, Miss Darvin. Essie did not curtsy. She only tilted her head. Aglaval hauled up his wet trousers and headed off towards the harbour, walking unsteadily over the pebbles. Only then did Geralt notice he was still holding the poet's hand, but she was not trying to free herself at all. He released her hand. Essie, slowly returning to her normal colours, turned her face towards his. It's easy to make you take a risk, she said. All it takes is a few words about women and children, and so much is said about how unfeeling you witches are. Geralt, Aglaval doesn't give a hoot about women, children, or the elderly. He wants the pearl fishing to begin again because he's losing money every day they don't come back with a catch. He's taking you for a ride with those starving children, and you're ready to risk your life. Essie, he interrupted. I'm a witcher. It's my trade to risk my life. Children have nothing to do with it. You can't fool me. Why the assumption that I mean to? Perhaps because if you were the heartless professional you pretend to be, you would have tried to push up the price. But you didn't say a word about your fee. Oh, never mind. Enough of all that. Are we going back? Let's walk on a little. Gladly. Geralt? Yes? I told you I grew up by the sea. I know how to steer a boat and put that out of your head. Why? Put that out of your head, he repeated sharply. You might, she said, have phrased that more politely. I might have, but you would have taken it as the devil only knows what. And I am an unfeeling witcher and heartless professional. I risk my life, not other people's. Essie fell silent. He saw her purse her lips and toss her head. A gust of wind ruffled her hair again, and her face was covered for a moment by a confusion of golden curls. I only wanted to help you, she said. I know. Thank you. Geralt? Yes. What if there is something behind the rumours Aglaval was talking about? You know well that mermaids aren't always friendly. There have been cases—
I don't believe them.
Sea witches, Little Eye continued pensively. Nereids, mermen, sea nymphs. Who knows what they're capable of? And Sheernats, she had reason—
I don't believe it,
he interrupted. You don't believe, or you don't want to believe? He did not reply. And you want to appear the cold professional? She asked with a strange smile. Someone who thinks with his sword hilt? If you want, I'll tell you what you really are.
I know what I really am.
You're sensitive, she said softly. Deep in your angst-filled soul, your stony face and cold voice don't deceive me. You are sensitive, and your sensitivity makes you fear that whatever you are going to face with sword in hand may have its own arguments, may have the moral advantage over you.
No, Essie, he said slowly. Don't try to make me the subject of a moving ballad, a ballad about a witcher with inner conflicts. Perhaps I'd like it to be the case, but it isn't. My moral dilemmas are resolved for me by my code and education, by my training.
Don't talk like that, she said in annoyance. I don't understand why you try to—
Essie, he interrupted her again. I don't want you to pick up false notions about me. I'm not a knight-errant.
You aren't a cold and unthinking killer either.
No, he agreed calmly. I'm not, although there are some who think differently. For it isn't my sensitivity and personal qualities that place me higher, but the vain and arrogant pride of a professional convinced of his value. A specialist in whom it was instilled that the code of his profession and cold routine is more legitimate than emotion, that they protect him against making a mistake which could be made should he become entangled in the dilemmas of good and evil, of order and chaos. No, Essie, it's not I that am sensitive, but you. After all, your profession demands that, doesn't it? It's you who became alarmed by the thought that an apparently pleasant mermaid attacked the pearl divers in an act of desperate revenge after being insulted. You immediately look for an excuse for the mermaid, extenuating circumstances. You balk at the thought that a witcher, hired by the Duke, will murder an exquisite mermaid just because she dared to yield to emotion. But the witcher, Essie, is free of such dilemmas, and of emotion. Even if it turns out that it was the mermaid, the witcher won't kill the mermaid, because the code forbids him. The code solves the dilemma for the witcher.
Little Eye looked at him, abruptly lifting up her head. All dilemmas? She asked quickly.
She knows about Yennefer, he thought. She knows. Dandelion, you bloody gossip. They looked at one another. What is concealed in your deep blue eyes, Essie? Curiosity? Fascination with otherness? What are the dark sides of your talent, Little Eye?
I apologize, she said. The question was foolish and naive. It hinted that I believed what you were saying. Let's go back. That wind chills to the marrow. Look how rough the sea is.
It is. Do you know what's fascinating, Essie?
What?
I was certain the rock where Aglaval met his mermaid was nearer the shore and bigger. And now it's not visible.
It's the tide, Essie said shortly. The water will soon reach all the way to the cliff.
All that way?
Yes. The water rises and falls here considerably, well over 10 cubits, because here in the strait and the mouth of the river there are so-called tidal echoes, as the sailors call them. Geralt looked towards the headland, at the dragon's fangs biting into a roaring, foaming breaker.
Essie, he asked, and when the tide starts going out?
What?
How far back does the sea go?
But what? Ah, I get it. Yes, you're right. It goes back to the line of the shelf.
The line of the what?
Well, it's like a shelf. Flat shallows, forming the seabed, which ends with a lip at the edge of the deep waters.
And the dragon's fangs?
Are right on that lip.
And they're reachable by wading? How long would I have?
I don't know. Little Eye frowned. You'd have to ask the locals, but I don't think it would be a good idea. Look, there are rocks between the land and the fangs. The entire shore is scored with bays and fjords. When the tide starts going out, gorges and basins full of water are formed there. I don't know if—" From the direction of the sea and the barely visible rocks came a splash and a loud melodic cry. "White hair," the mermaid called, gracefully leaping over the crest of a wave, threshing the water with short, elegant strokes of her tail. "She and nuts," he called back, waving a hand. The mermaid swam over to the rocks, stood erect in the foaming green water, and used both hands to fling back her hair, at the same time revealing her torso with all its charms. Geralt glanced at Essie. The girl blushed slightly, and with an expression of regret and embarrassment on her face, looked for a moment at her own charms, which barely protruded beneath her dress. "Where is my man?" Shinat sang, swimming closer. "He was meant to have come."
"He did. He waited for 3 hours and then left."
"He left," the mermaid said in a high trill of astonishment. "He didn't wait. He could not endure 3 meagre hours. Just as I thought. Not a scrap of sacrifice, not a scrap. Despicable, despicable, despicable! And what are you doing here, Whitehair? Did you come here for a walk with your beloved? You'd make a pretty couple. Were you not marred by your legs?"
"She is not my beloved. We barely know each other."
"Yes," Shinat said in astonishment. "Pity. You suit each other. You look lovely together. Who is it?" "I'm Essie Davenport," Little Eye sang, with an accent and melody, beside which the witch's voice sounded like the cawing of a crow. "Nice to meet you, She-a-nuts." The mermaid slapped her hands on the water and laughed brightly. "How gorgeous!" she cried. "You know our tongue. Upon my word, you astonish me, you humans. Verily, not nearly as much divides us as people say." The Witcher was no less astonished than the mermaid, although he might have guessed that the educated and well-read Essie would know the elder speech better than him. It was the language of the elves, a euphonious version of which was used by mermaids, sea witches, and nereids. It also ought to have been clear to him that the melodiousness and complicated intonation pattern of the mermaid's speech, which for him was a handicap, made it easier for Little Eye.
"She-a-nuts," he called. "A few things divide us, nevertheless, and what occasionally divides us is spilled blood. Who killed the pearl divers over there by the 2 rocks? Tell me."
The mermaid dived down, churning the water. A moment later, she spurted back out onto the surface again, and her pretty little face was contracted and drawn into an ugly grimace. "Don't you dare!" she screamed, piercingly shrilly. "Don't you dare go near the steps! It is not for you! Don't fall foul of them! It is not for you!"
What isn't for us?"
"Not for you!" Shinat yelled, falling onto her back on the waves. Splashes of water shot high up. For just a moment longer, they saw her forked, finned tail flapping over the waves. Then she vanished under the water. Little Eye tidied her hair, which had been ruffled by the wind. She stood motionless with her head bowed.
"I didn't know," Geralt said, clearing his throat, "that you knew the elder speech so well, Essie."
"You couldn't have known," she said, with a distinct bitterness in her voice. After all, you barely know me." Chapter 6. "Geralt," Dandelion said, looking around and sniffing like a hound, "it stinks terribly here, don't you think?"
"Does it?"
The Witcher sniffed.
"I've been in places where it smelled worse. It's only the smell of the sea."
The bard turned his head away and spat between 2 rocks. The water bubbled in the rocky clefts, foaming and soughing, exposing gorges full of sea-worn pebbles. "Look how nicely it's dried out, Geralt. Where has the water gone? What is it with those bloody tides? Where do they come from? Haven't you ever thought about it?
No, I've had other concerns.
I think, Dandelion said, trembling slightly, that down there, in the depths, at the very bottom of this bloody ocean, crouches a huge monster, a fat, scaly beast, a toad with horns on its vile head. And from time to time it draws water into its belly, and with the water everything that lives and can be eaten. Fish, seals, turtles, everything. And then, having devoured its prey, it pukes up the water, and we have the tide. What do you think about that?
I think you're a fool. Yennefer once told me that the moon causes the tides.
Dandelion cackled. What bloody rubbish! What does the moon have to do with the sea? Only dogs howl at the moon. She was having you on, Geralt. That little liar of yours. She put one over on you. Not for the first time either, I'd say. The Witcher did not comment. He looked at the boulders glistening with water in the ravines exposed by the tide. The water was still exploding and foaming in them, but it looked as though they would get through.
Very well, let's get to work, he said,
standing and adjusting his sword on his back.
We can't wait any longer, or we won't make it back before the tide comes in. Do you still insist on coming with me?
Yes. Subjects for ballads aren't fir cones. You don't find them under a tree. Aside from that, it's Poppet's birthday tomorrow.
I don't see the link.
Pity. There exists the custom among we normal people of giving one another presents on birthdays. I can't afford to buy her anything, so I shall find something for her on the seabed.
A herring or a cuttlefish?
Dolt. I'll find some amber, perhaps a seahorse or maybe a pretty conch. The point is, it's a symbol, a sign of concern and affection. I like Little Eye, and I want to please her. Don't you understand? I thought not. Let's go. You first, because there might be a monster down there.
Right.
The Witcher slid down from the cliff onto the slippery rocks covered with algae.
I'll go first, in order to protect you if needs be, as a sign of my concern and affection. Just remember, if I shout, run like hell, and don't get tangled up in my sword. We aren't going to gather seahorses. We're going to deal with a monster that murders people.
They set off downwards into the rifts of the exposed seabed, in some places wading through the water still swirling in the rocky vents. They splashed around in hollows lined with sand and bladderwrack. To make matters worse, it began to rain, so they were soon soaked from head to foot. Dandelion kept stopping and digging around in the pebbles and tangles of seaweed. Oh, look, Geralt, a little fish. It's all red, by the devil. And here, look, a little eel. And this, what is it? It looks like a great big transparent flea. And this, oh, mother, Geralt! The Witcher turned around at once, with his hand on his sword. It was a human skull, white, worn smooth by the rocks, jammed into a rocky crevice full of sand. But not only sand. Dandelion, seeing a lugworm writhing in the eye socket, shuddered and made an unpleasant noise. The Witcher shrugged and headed towards the rocky plain exposed by the sea, in the direction of the two jagged reefs known as the Dragon's Fangs, which now looked like mountains. He moved cautiously. The seabed was strewn with sea cucumbers, shells, and piles of bladderwrack. Large jellyfish swayed and brittle stars whirled in the rock pools and hollows. Small crabs as colourful as hummingbirds fled from them, creeping sideways, their legs scurrying busily. Geralt noticed a corpse some way off, wedged between the rocks. The drowned man's chest could be seen moving beneath his shirt and the seaweed, though in principle there was no longer anything to move it. It was teeming with crabs, outside and inside. The body could not have been in the water longer than a day, but the crabs had picked it so clean it was pointless examining it closer. The Witcher changed direction without a word, giving the corpse a wide berth. Dandelion did not notice anything. Why, but it stinks of rot here, he swore, trying to catch up with Geralt. He spat and shook water from his bonnet. And it's tipping down, and I'm cold. I'll catch a chill and lose my bloody voice.
Stop moaning. If you want to go back, you know the way.
Right beyond the base of the Dragon's Fangs stretched out a flat, rocky shelf, and beyond it was deep water, the calmly rippling sea, the limit of the tide. Ha, Geralt, Dandelion said, looking around. I think that monster of yours had enough sense to withdraw to the high sea with the tide. And I guess you thought it'd be lazing about here somewhere, waiting for you to hack it to pieces? Be quiet. The Witcher approached the edge of the shelf and knelt down, cautiously resting his hands on the sharp shells clinging to the rocks. He could not see anything. The water was dark, and the surface was cloudy, dulled by the drizzle. Dandelion searched the recesses of the reefs, kicking the more aggressive crabs from his legs, examining and feeling the dripping rocks, bearded with sagging seaweed and specked with coarse colonies of crustaceans and mollusks. Hey, Geralt! What? Look at those shells. They're pearl oysters, aren't they? No. Know anything about them? No. So keep your opinions to yourself until you do know something. They are pearl oysters, I'm certain. I'll start collecting pearls. At least there'll be some profit from this expedition, not just a cold. Shall I begin, Geralt? Go ahead. The monster attacks pearl divers. Pearl collectors probably fall into the same category. Am I to be bait? Start collecting. Take the bigger ones, because if you don't find any pearls, we can make soup out of them. Forget it. I'll just collect pearls. Fuck the shells. Damn it, bitch. How do you bloody open it? Do you have a knife, Geralt? Haven't you even brought a knife? I'm a poet, not some knifer. Oh, to hell with it. I'll put them in a bag and we'll get the pearls out later. Hey, you, scram! He kicked off a crab, which flew over Geralt's head and splashed into the water. The Witcher walked slowly along the edge of the shelf, eyes fixed on the black, impenetrable water. He heard the rhythmic tapping of the stone Dandelion was using to dislodge the shells from the rock. Dandelion, come and look! The jagged, cracked shelf suddenly ended in a level, sharp edge, which fell downwards at an acute angle. Immense, angular, regular blocks of white marble, overgrown with seaweed, mollusks and sea anemones swaying in the water like flowers in the breeze, could clearly be seen beneath the surface of the water. What is it? They look like steps. Because they are steps, Dandelion whispered in awe. They're steps leading to an underwater city, to the legendary Is, which was swallowed up by the sea. Have you heard the legend of the city of the chasm, about Is beneath the waves? I shall write such a ballad the competition won't know what's hit them. I have to see it up close. Look, there's some kind of mosaic. Something is engraved or carved there. Some kind of writing? Move away, Geralt. Dandelion, that's a trench. You'll slip off. Never mind, I'm wet anyway. See, it's shallow here. Barely waist deep on this first step, and as wide as a ballroom. Oh, bloody hell! Geralt jumped very quickly into the water and grabbed the bard who had fallen in up to his neck. I tripped on that shit, Dandelion said, gasping for air, recovering himself and lifting a large flat mollusk dripping water from its cobalt blue shell, overgrown with threads of algae. There's loads of these on the steps. It's a pretty colour, don't you think? Grab it and shove it in your bag. Mine's already full. Get out of there, the Witcher snapped, annoyed. Get back on the shelf this minute, Dandelion. This isn't a game. Quiet. Did you hear that? What was it? Geralt heard it. The sound was coming from below, from under the water. Dull and deep, although simultaneously faint. Soft, brief, broken off. The sound of a bell. It's a bloody bell, Dandelion whispered, clambering out onto the shelf. I was right, Geralt. It's the bell of the sunken Is, the bell of the city of monsters, muffled by the weight of the depths. It's the damned reminding us, will you shut up? The sound repeated, considerably closer. Reminding us, the bard continued, squeezing out the soaking tail of his jerkin, of its dreadful fate. That bell is a warning. The Witcher stopped paying attention to Dandelion's voice and concentrated on his other senses. He sensed something. It's a warning, Dandelion said, sticking the tip of his tongue out, as was his custom when he was concentrating. A warning because... so we would not forget. Oh, I've got it. The heart of the bell sounds softly. It sings a song of death which can be borne more easily than oblivion. The water right next to the Witcher exploded. Dandelion screamed. The goggle-eyed monster emerging from the foam aimed a broad, serrated, scythe-like blade at Geralt. Geralt's sword was already in his hand from the moment the water had begun to swell, so now he merely twisted confidently at the hips and slashed the monster across its drooping, scaly dewlap. He immediately turned the other way, where another creature was churning up the water. It was wearing a bizarre helmet and something resembling a suit of armour made of tarnished copper. The Witcher parried the blade of the short spear being thrust towards him with a broad sweep of his sword, and with the momentum the parry gave him, struck across the ichthyoid reptilian toothy muzzle. He leapt aside towards the edge of the shelf, splashing water. "Fly, Dandelion! Give me your hand! Fly, damn it!" Another creature emerged from the water, the curved sword whistling in its rough green hands. The Witcher thrust his back against the edge of the shellfish-covered rock, assumed a fighting position, but the fish-eyed creature did not approach. It was the same height as Geralt. The water also reached to its waist, but the impressively puffed-up comb on its head and its dilated gills gave the impression of greater size. The grimace distorting the broad maw, armed with teeth, was deceptively similar to a cruel smile. The creature, paying no attention to the two twitching bodies floating in the red water, raised its sword, gripping the long hilt without a crossguard in both hands. Puffing up its comb and gills even more, it deftly spun the blade in the air. Geralt heard the light blade hiss and whir. The creature took a pace forward, sending a wave towards the Witcher. Geralt took a swing and whirled his sword in response, and also took a step, taking up the challenge. The fish-eyed creature deftly twisted its long-clawed fingers on the hilt and slowly lowered its arms, which were protected by tortoiseshell and copper, and plunged them up to its elbows, concealing the weapon beneath the water. The Witcher grasped his sword in both hands, his right hand just below the crossguard, his left by the pommel, and lifted the weapon up and a little to the side, above his right shoulder. He looked into the monster's eyes, but they were the iridescent eyes of a fish, eyes with spherical irises glistening coldly and metallically, eyes which neither expressed nor betrayed anything, nothing that might warn of an attack. From the depths at the bottom of the steps, disappearing into the black chasm, came the sound of a bell. Closer and closer, more and more distinct. The fish-eyed creature lunged forward, pulling its blade from under the water, attacking as swiftly as a thought with a montante thrust. Geralt was simply lucky. He had expected the blow to be dealt from the right. He parried with his blade, directed downwards, powerfully twisting his body, and rotated his sword, meeting the monster's sword flat. Now everything depended on which of them would twist their fingers more quickly on the hilt, who would be first to move from the flat, static impasse of the blades to a blow whose force was now being generated by both of them, by shifting their body weight to the appropriate leg. Geralt already knew they were as fast as each other. But the fish-eyed creature had longer fingers. The Witcher struck it in the side above the hips, twisted into a half-turn, smote, pressing down on the blade, and easily dodged a wide, chaotic, desperate, and clumsy blow. The monster, noiselessly opening its ichthyoid mouth, disappeared beneath the water, which was pulsating with crimson clouds. "Give me your hand, quickly!" Dandelion yelled. "They're coming! A whole gang of them! I can see them!" The Witcher seized the bard's right hand, and Dandelion hauled him out of the water onto the rocky shelf. A broad wave splashed behind him. The tide had turned. They fled swiftly, pursued by the swelling wave. Geralt looked back and saw numerous other fish-like creatures bursting from the water, saw them giving chase, leaping nimbly on their muscular legs. Without a word, he speeded up. Dandelion was panting, running heavily and splashing around the now knee-high water. He suddenly stumbled and fell, sloshing among the bladder wrack, supporting himself on trembling arms. Geralt caught him by the belt and hauled him out of the foam, now seething all around them. "Run!" he cried. "I'll hold them back." "Geralt, run, Dandelion! The water's about to fill the rift, and then we won't get out of here. Run for your life!" Dandelion groaned and ran. The Witcher ran after him, hoping the monsters would become strung out in the chase. He knew he had no chance taking on the entire group. They chased him just beside the rift because the water there was deep enough for them to swim, while he was clambering the slippery rocks with difficulty, wallowing in the foam. In the rift, however, it was too tight for them to assail him from all sides. He stopped in the basin where Dandelion had found the skull. He stopped and turned around and calmed down. He struck the first with the very tip of his sword, where the temple would have been on a man. He split open the belly of the next one, which was armed with something resembling a short battle-axe. A third fled. The Witcher rushed up the gorge, but at the same time a surging wave boomed, erupting in foam, seethed in an eddy in the vent, tore him off the rocks and dragged him downwards into the boiling water. He collided with a fishy creature flapping about in the eddy and thrust it away with a kick. Something caught him by his legs and pulled him down towards the seafloor. He hit the rock on his back, opened his eyes, just in time to see the dark shapes of the creatures, two swift blurs. He parried the first blur with his sword and instinctively protected himself from the second by raising his left arm. He felt a blow, pain, and immediately afterwards the sharp sting of salt. He pushed off from the bottom with his feet, splashed upwards towards the surface, formed his fingers together and released a sign. The explosion was dull and stabbed his ears with a brief paroxysm of pain. If I get out of this, he thought, beating the water with his arms and legs. If I get out of this, I'll ride to Yen in Vengerberg and I'll try again. If I get out of this. He thought he could hear the booming of a trumpet or a horn. The tidal wave exploding again in the chimney lifted him up and tossed him out on his belly onto a large rock. Now he could clearly hear a booming horn and Dandelion's cries, seemingly coming from all sides at once. He snorted the salt water from his nose and looked around, tossing his wet hair from his face. He was on the shore, right where they had set out from. He was lying belly down on the rocks, and a breaker was seething white foam around him. Behind him, in the gorge, now a narrow bay, a large grey dolphin danced on the waves. On its back, tossing her wet, willow-green hair, sat the mermaid. She still had beautiful breasts. "White hair," she sang, waving a hand which was holding a large, conical, spirally twisting conch. "Are you in one piece?" "Yes," the Witcher said in amazement. The foam around him had become pink. His left arm had stiffened and was stinging from the salt. His jacket sleeve was cut, straight and evenly, and blood was gushing from the cut. "I got out of it," he thought. "I pulled it off again. But no, I'm not going anywhere." He saw Dandelion, who was running towards him, stumbling over the wet pebbles. "I've held them back," the mermaid sang, and sounded the conch again. "But not for long. Flee and return here no more. White hair, the sea is not for you." "I know," he shouted back. "I know. Thank you, Shienats." Chapter 7. "Dandelion," Little Eye said, tearing the end of the bandage with her teeth and tying a knot on Geralt's wrist. "Explain to me how a pile of snail shells ended up at the bottom of the stairs. Draughard's wife is clearing them up right now and is making it clear what she thinks of you two." "Shells?" Dandelion asked. "What shells? I have no idea. Perhaps some passing ducks dropped them." Geralt smiled, turning his head toward the shadow. He smiled at the memory of Dandelion's curses. He had spent the entire afternoon opening shells and rummaging around in the slippery flesh, during which process he had nicked himself and soiled his shirt, but hadn't found a single pearl. And no small wonder, as they weren't pearl oysters at all, but ordinary scallops and mussels. They abandoned the idea of making soup from the shellfish when Dandelion opened the first shell. The mollusk looked unappealing and stank to high heaven. Little Eye finished bandaging him and sat down on an upturned tub. The Witcher thanked her, examining his neatly bandaged arm. The wound was deep and quite long, extending as far as the elbow, and intensely painful when he moved it. She had put on a makeshift dressing by the seashore, but before they got back, it had begun to bleed again. Just before the girl arrived, Geralt had poured a coagulating elixir onto his mutilated forearm, and boosted it with an anaesthetic elixir, and Essie had caught them just as he and Dandelion were suturing the wound using a fishing line tied to a hook. Little Eye swore at them and got down to making a dressing herself, while Dandelion regaled her with a colourful tale of the fight, several times reserving himself the exclusive right to compose a ballad about the whole incident. Essie naturally flooded Geralt with an avalanche of questions, which he was unable to answer. She took that badly, and evidently had the impression he was concealing something from her. She became sullen and ceased her questioning. "Aglaval already knows," she said. You were seen returning, and Mrs. Drowhard ran off to spread the word when she saw the blood on the stairs. The people dashed towards the rocks, hoping the sea would toss something out. They're still hanging around there, but haven't found anything, from what I know."
"Nor will they," the Witcher said. "I shall visit Aglaval tomorrow, but ask him, if you would, to forbid people from hanging around the dragon's fangs. Just not a word, please, about those steps or Dandelion's fantasies about the city of Ys. Treasure and sensation hunters would immediately go, and there'll be further deaths."
"I'm not a gossip," Essie said sulkily, sharply tossing her lock from her forehead. "If I ask you something, it isn't in order to dash off to the well at once and blab it to the washerwomen."
"I'm sorry."
"I must go," Dandelion suddenly said. "I've got a rendezvous with Acaretta. Geralt, I'm taking your jerkin because mine is incredibly filthy and wet." "Everything here is wet," Little Eye said sneeringly, nudging the articles of clothing strewn around with the tip of her shoe in disgust. "How can you? They need to be hung up and properly dried. You're dreadful." "It'll dry off by itself." Dandelion pulled on Geralt's damp jacket and examined the silver studs on the sleeves with delight. "Don't talk rubbish. And what's this? Oh, no, that bag is still full of sludge and seaweed. And this? What's this? Yuck!" Geralt and Dandelion silently observed the cobalt-blue shell Essie was holding between two fingers. They had forgotten. The mollusk was slightly open and clearly reeked. "It's a present," the troubadour said, moving back towards the door. "It's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it, Poppet? Well, that's a present for you." "This? Pretty, isn't it?" Dandelion sniffed it and added quickly, "It's from Geralt. He chose it for you. Oh, is that the time? Farewell." Little Eye was quiet for a moment after he had gone. The Witcher looked at the stinking shellfish and felt ashamed, of Dandelion and of himself. "Did you remember my birthday?" Essie asked slowly, holding the shell at arm's length. "Really?"
"Give it to me," he said sharply.
He got up from the palliasse, protecting his bandaged arm.
"I apologize for that, idiot."
"No," she protested, removing a small knife from a sheath at her belt. "It really is a pretty shell. I'll keep it as a memento. It only needs cleaning. After I've got rid of the contents, I'll throw them out of the window. The cats can eat them." Something clattered on the floor and rolled away. Geralt widened his pupils and saw what it was long before Essie. It was a pearl, an exquisitely iridescent and shimmering pearl of faintly blue colour, as big as a swollen pea. "By the gods!" Little Eye had also caught sight of it. "Geralt! A pearl!"
"A pearl?" he laughed. "And so you did get a present, Essie. I'm glad."
"Geralt, I can't accept it. That pearl is worth—"
"It's yours," he interrupted. "Dandelion, though he plays the fool, really did remember your birthday. He really wanted to please you. He talked about it, talked aloud about it. Well, fate heard him and did what had to be done."
"And you, Geralt?"
"Me?"
"Did you also want to please me? That pearl is so beautiful. It must be hugely valuable. Don't you regret it?"
"I'm pleased you like it. And if I regret anything, it's that there was only one, and that—"
"Yes?"
"That I haven't known you as long as Dandelion. Long enough to be able to know and remember your birthday. To be able to give you presents and please you. To be able to call you Poppet."
She moved closer and suddenly threw her arms around his neck. He nimbly and swiftly anticipated her movement, dodged her lips, and kissed her coldly on the cheek, embracing her with his uninjured arm, clumsily, with reserve, gently. He felt the girl stiffen and slowly move back, but only to the length of her arms, which were still resting on his shoulders. He knew what she was waiting for, but did not do it. He did not draw her towards him. Essie let him go and turned towards the open, dirty little window. "Of course," she said suddenly. "You barely know me. I forgot that you barely know me."
"Essie," he said after a moment's silence.
I barely know you either," she blurted, interrupting him. "What of it? I love you. I can't help it. Not at all. Essie!
Yes, I love you, Geralt. I don't care what you think. I've loved you from the moment I saw you at the engagement party.
She broke off, lowering her head. She stood before him, and Geralt regretted it was her and not the fish-eyed creature with a sword who had been hidden beneath the water. He had stood a chance against that creature, but against her he had none.
You aren't saying anything,
she said.
Nothing. Not a word.
I'm tired, he thought. I'm bloody weak. I need to sit down. I'm feeling dizzy. I've lost some blood and haven't eaten anything. I have to sit down. Damned little attic, he thought. I hope it gets struck by lightning and burns down during the next storm. And there's no bloody furniture, not even two stupid chairs and a table which divides you, across which you can so easily and safely talk. You can even hold hands. But I have to sit down on the palliasse, have to ask her to sit down beside me. And the palliasse, stuffed with beanstalks, is dangerous. You can't escape from it. Take evasive action. Sit beside me, Essie. She sat down reluctantly, tactfully, far away. Too close.
When I found out, she whispered, interrupting the long silence. When I heard that Dandelion had dragged you onto the beach, bleeding, I ran out of the house like a mad thing, rushed blindly, paying no attention to anything. And then, do you know what I thought? That it was magic, that you had cast a spell on me, that you had secretly, treacherously bewitched me, spellbound me with your wolfish medallion with the evil eye. That's what I thought. But I didn't stop, kept running, because I understood that I desire to fall under your spell. And the reality turned out to be more awful. You didn't cast any spell on me. You didn't use any charms. Why, Geralt? Why didn't you bewitch me?
He was silent.
If it had been magic, she said, it would all be so simple and easy. I would have succumbed to your power, and I'd be happy, but this, I don't know what's happening to me.
Damn it, he thought. If Yennefer feels like I do now when she's with me, I feel sorry for her, and I shall never be astonished again. I will never hate her again. Never again. Because perhaps Yennefer feels what I'm feeling now. Feels a profound certainty that I ought to fulfill what it is impossible to fulfill. Even more impossible to fulfill than the relationship between Aglaval and Sheernats. Certainty that a little sacrifice isn't enough here. You'd have to sacrifice everything, and there'd still be no way of knowing if that would be enough. No, I won't continue to hate Yennefer for not being able and not wanting to give me more than a little sacrifice. Now I know that a little sacrifice is a hell of a lot.
Geralt,
Little Eye moaned, drawing her head into her shoulders.
I'm so ashamed. I'm ashamed of what I'm feeling. It's like an accursed infirmity, like malaria, like being unable to breathe.
He was silent.
I always thought it was a beautiful and noble state of mind. Noble and dignified, even if it makes one unhappy. After all, I've composed so many ballads about it. And it is organic, Geralt. Meanly and heartbreakingly organic. Someone who is ill or who has drunk poison might feel like this. Because, like someone who has drunk poison, one is prepared to do anything in exchange for an antidote. Anything. Even be humiliated.
Essie, please.
Yes, I feel humiliated. Humiliated by having confessed everything to you, disregarding the dignity that demands one suffers in silence. By the fact that my confession caused you embarrassment, I feel humiliated by the fact that you're embarrassed. But I couldn't have behaved any differently. I'm powerless, at your mercy, like someone who's bedridden. I've always been afraid of illness, of being weak, helpless, hopeless and alone. I've always been afraid of sickness, always believing it the worst thing that could befall me.
He was silent.
I know, she groaned again.
I know I ought to be grateful to you for not taking advantage of the situation. But I'm not grateful to you, and I'm ashamed of it. For I hate your silence, your terrified eyes. I hate you for staying silent, for not lying, for not... And I hate her, that sorceress of yours. I'd happily stab her for... I hate her. Make me go, Geralt. Order me to leave here. For of my own free will I cannot, but I want to get out of here, go to the city, to a tavern. I want to have my revenge on you for my shame, for the humiliation. I'll go to the first man I find. Damn it, he thought, hearing her voice dropping like a rag ball rolling down the stairs. She'll burst into tears, he thought. There's no doubt she'll burst into tears. What to do? What to bloody do? Essie's hunched-up shoulders were trembling hard. The girl turned her head away and began to weep, crying softly, dreadfully calmly and unrelentingly. I don't feel anything, he noticed with horror. Nothing. Not the smallest emotion. That fact that I will embrace her is a deliberate, measured response, not a spontaneous one. I'll hug her, for I feel as though I ought to, not because I want to. I feel nothing. When he embraced her, she stopped crying immediately, wiped away her tears, shaking her head forcefully and turning away so that he could not see her face. And then she pressed herself to him firmly, burying her head in his chest. A little sacrifice, he thought. Just a little sacrifice. For this will calm her. A hug, a kiss, calm caresses. She doesn't want anything more. And even if she did, what of it? For a little sacrifice, a very little sacrifice, is beautiful and worth... Were she to want more, it would calm her. A quiet, calm, gentle act of love. And why, it doesn't matter, because Essie smells of verbena, not lilac and gooseberry, doesn't have cool, electrifying skin. Essie's hair is not a black tornado of gleaming curls. Essie's eyes are gorgeous, soft, warm, and cornflower blue. They don't blaze with a cold, unemotional, deep violet. Essie will fall asleep afterwards, turn her head away, open her mouth slightly. Essie will not smile in triumph. For Essie is not Yennefer. And that is why I cannot find that little sacrifice inside myself. Please, Essie, don't cry. I won't, she said, moving very slowly away from him. I won't. I understand. It cannot be any other way. They said nothing, sitting beside each other on the palliasse stuffed with beanstalks. Evening was approaching. Geralt, she suddenly said, and her voice trembled. But perhaps it would be like it was with that shell, with that curious gift. Perhaps we could find a pearl. Later, when some time has passed. I can see that pearl, he said with effort, set in silver, in a little silver flower with intricate petals. I see it around your neck on a delicate silver chain worn like I wear my medallion. That will be your talisman, Essie. A talisman which will protect you from all evil. My talisman, she repeated, lowering her head. My pearl, which I shall set in silver, and from which I shall never part. My jewel, which I was given instead of... Can a talisman like that bring me luck? Yes, Essie, be sure of it. Can I stay here a little longer, with you? You may. Twilight was approaching, and dusk falling, and they were sitting on a palliasse stuffed with beanstalks in the garret, where there was no furniture, where there was only a wooden tub and an unlit candle on the floor in a puddle of hardened wax. They sat in utter silence for a very long time. And then Dandelion came. They heard him approaching, strumming his lute and humming to himself. Dandelion entered, saw them, and did not say anything. Not a word. Essie also said nothing, stood up and went out without looking at them. Dandelion did not say a word, but the Witcher saw in his eyes the words that remained unsaid. Chapter 8. An intelligent race, Aglaval repeated pensively, resting an elbow on the armrest and his fist on his chin. An underwater civilization. Fish-like people living on the seabed, steps leading to the depths. Geralt, you take me for a bloody gullible duke. Little Eye, standing beside Dandelion, snarled angrily. Dandelion shook his head in disbelief. Geralt was not in the least bothered. It makes no difference to me, he said quietly, if you believe me or not. It is, however, my duty to warn you. Any boat that sails towards the Dragon's Fangs, or people who appear there when the tide is out, are in danger. Mortal danger. If you want to find out if it's true, if you want to risk it, that's your business. I'm simply warning you. Ha! The steward Zelest, who was sitting in a window seat behind Aglaval, suddenly said, If they are monsters, the like of elves or other goblins, we don't need to worry. We feared it was something worse, or, God save us, something magical. From what the Witcher says, there are some kind of sea drowners or other sea monsters. There are ways of dealing with drowners. I heard tell that one sorcerer gave some drowners short shrift in Lake Montfort. He poured a small barrel of magical filter into the water and did for the fuckers. Didn't leave a trace. That's true, Drowhard said, who up to then had been silent. There wasn't a trace. Nor a trace of bream, pike, crayfish, or mussels. Even the waterweed on the lake floor rotted away and the alders on the bank withered. Capital, Aglaval said derisively. Thank you for that excellent suggestion, Zelest. Do you have any more? Aye, fair enough, the steward said, blushing. The wizard overdid it a mite with his wand, waved it about a jot too much. But we ought to manage without wizards too, your grace. The Witcher says that one can fight those monsters and also kill 'em. That's war, sire, like the old days. Nothing new there, eh? Were-lynxes lived in the mountains, and where are they now? Wild elves and eerie wives still roam the forests, but there'll soon be an end to that. We'll secure what is ours, as our granddaddies, and only my grandchildren will see the pearls. The Duke grimaced. It is too long to wait, Zelest. Well, it won't be that bad. Seems to me it's like this. 2 boats of archers to each boat of divers. We'll soon learn those monsters some sense, learn them some fear. Am I right, Witcher, sir? Geralt looked coldly at him, but did not respond. Aglaval turned his head away, showing his noble profile, and bit his lip. Then he looked at the Witcher, narrowing his eyes and frowning. You didn't complete your task, Geralt, he said. You fouled things up again. You had good intentions, I can't deny that. But I don't pay for good intentions, I pay for results, for the effect. And the effect, excuse the expression, is shitty, so you earn shit. Marvellous, your grace, Dandelion jibed. Pity you weren't with us at the Dragon's Fangs. The Witcher and I might have given you the opportunity for an encounter with one of those from the sea, sword in hand. Perhaps then you would understand what this is about, and stop bickering about payment. Like a fishwife, Little Eye interjected. I am not accustomed to bickering, bargaining, or discussing, Aglaval said calmly. I said I shall not pay you a penny, Geralt. The agreement ran, remove the danger, remove the threat, enable the fishing of pearls without any risk to people. But you come and tell me about an intelligent race from the seabed. You advise me to stay away from the place which brings me profit. What did you do? You reputedly killed how many? It matters not how many, Geralt said, blanching slightly. At least, not to you, Aglaval. Precisely. Particularly since there is no proof. If you had at least brought the right hands of those fish-toads, who knows? Perhaps I would have splashed out on the normal fee my forester takes for a pair of wolf's ears. Well, the Witcher said coldly, I'm left with no choice but to say farewell. You are mistaken, the Duke said. Something does remain. Permanent work for quite decent coin and lodgings. The position and ticket of skipper of my armed guard, which from now on will accompany the divers. It does not have to be forever, but only until your reputed intelligent race gains enough good sense to keep well away from my boats, to avoid them like the plague. What do you say?" "No, thank you. I decline," the Witcher grimaced. "A job like that doesn't suit me. I consider waging war against other races idiocy. Perhaps it's excellent sport for bored and jaded dukes, but not for me." "Oh, how proud!" Aglaval smiled. "How haughty! You reject offers in a way some kings wouldn't be ashamed of. You give up decent money with the air of a wealthy man after a lavish dinner. Geralt, did you have lunch today? No? And tomorrow, and the day after? I see little chance, Witcher, very little. It's difficult for you to find work normally, and now, with your arm in a sling—" "How dare you?" Little Ike cried shrilly. "How dare you speak like that to him, Aglaval? The arm he now carries in a sling was cut, carrying out your mission. How can you be so base?" "Stop it," Geralt said. "Stop, Essie. There's no point."
"Not true.